Okay, so I think that we can begin. Let me just press the record button. Okay, I think I successfully started recording. So welcome everyone. So it's a great pleasure for us today to hear a lecture by two esteemed colleagues from Chile. One of the Manuel and Manuel Reyes he's a psychiatrist and master in philosophy from the University of Chile. He's also an assistant professor of the Department of Psychiatry and Mental Health in School of Medicine in University of Chile. He's the head of the psychosis unit at the University Psychiatric Clinic at his university, where he's also the professor in charge of psychopathology training for psychiatry residents. During the last 3 years, he has been one of the directors of the one-year course of psychopathology of psychosis, which is promoted by the same institution. And it's really a great pleasure to introduce Manuel. I know him from several meetings, which were mostly phenomenologically themed and in phenomenology of psychosis mostly, and phenomenology in general. So I'm very glad. And Manuel Ugalde Duarte is a psychologist, master in contemporary thought. He's the co-lecturer today and the professor of the North Department of Psychiatry and Mental Health in School of Medicine, University of Chile. He's the coordinator of the Unit of Philosophy and Humanities of Psychiatry and member of the Psychosis Unit, both of the University Psychiatric Clinic, University of Chile, secretary of the Working Group of Psychopathology, Philosophy and Humanities of the Chilean Society of Neurology, Psychiatry and Neurosurgery. So, and I wish him also a warm welcome today. So, as usual, we now give the floor to our lecturers, and at the end, we'll have some time for any questions or possible comments. So, Manuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefan. It is a really pleasure for us to be here with you today and with everyone that is connected and there in the room. First, we want to thank you, Stefan and Janko, for inviting us to this wonderful meeting and the group for contemporary philosophy of the Institute of Social Sciences. So we're very happy to be here. We think it's an honor, and we want to present a working project, and so all the comments and critiques and so on will be really a really good feedback for us. So I'm gonna share my screen, and because of our English is not that good, we will show a presentation that it's had a lot of text, but I think it will be better because in that way you can follow our presentation and we can follow our reading. So let me, always this begins having issues when you need it. Okay. So I think that's okay. It's okay? Okay, great.
Yeah, it's okay.
So here in the slide we have the organization that we work on. It's the Clínica Psiquiátrica de la Universidad de Chile, la Unidad de Psicosis, and in the right top the logo of the Unidad de Filosofía, or philosophy unit on humanities of psychiatry. So I'm Manuel Reyes, and there's my colleague and friend Manuel Ugalde Duarte, and today we want to present work that we're carrying on the last months, and it's called Delusion and the Ununderstandable, insights from Waldenfels' phenomenology of the L. So I will begin, but I don't know, Manuel, if you want to add something to the presentation.
No, nothing, I think. Only thanks a lot for all of you to being present today. We are so happy. Only that.
Great. So I will begin, and this, I think it's interesting to remark that Manuel is a psychoanalyst and I'm a psychiatrist, and we both have interest in phenomenology and philosophy. So I think it puts a fine couple trying to tackle these kind of issues and theoretical and clinical problems. So the introduction to the problem. In the foundational work of phenomenological psychopathology and general psychopathology, Karl Jaspers delimits and addresses a series of theoretical and conceptual problems. One of them is the relationship between understanding, verstehen, and explaining, erklären, as methods of knowledge to a particular phenomenon. While understanding accounts for a relationship of meaning, where the psychic event emerged from another, in explaining, a causal link is established, leaving aside the possibility of meaning. Thus, Jaspers follows the distinction made by Wilhelm Dilthey, according to which we explain nature, but we understand mental life. In the elaboration of this problem, Jaspers raises a delimitation that, to a large extent, has been maintained until today. According to the author, understanding finds limits everywhere. And the encounter with such a limit, namely the ununderstandability, is nothing but an incentive to seek an explanation in the form of biological somatic facts. This distinction, complex and problematic, with profound clinical consequences, has been reviewed and questioned in the contemporary psychopathological debate. In the view of this problem is that during the last few years, and in particular since the centenary of the publication of General Psychopathology, phenomenological psychopathology has been rethinking possible approaches within the field that would allow not just to accurately describe and delimit the experience of the patients, but also to make sense of suffering, disorders, and mental illnesses. This approach has attempted to distance itself from the first-person perspective of the biomedical model, emphasizing instead first-person perspective that accounts for the patient's lived experience. However, as some researchers have shown in recent years, the standard phenomenological perspective developed within phenomenological psychopathology seems to have certain drawbacks to succeed in putting at the center the lived experience of the patients themselves, in terms of a meaning-making process, when employing the theoretical and clinical tools of the field. The most instructive case is seen in psychosis, and in particular in delusional phenomena, which are traditionally a hallmark of it. This is because both classical and contemporary phenomenological psychopathology do not seem to adequately read a series of subjective dimensions of meaning and meanings of delusion. Specifically, and as we attempt to show, it is not only that Jaspersian psychopathology presents problems in proposing the distinction between explanation and understanding to enter into the meaning of delusion, but also that several contemporary models that attempt to overcome the problem of this classical distinction fail to formulate a translation that does fairness to the construction of the world and the meaning of the delusional phenomenon from the first-person account. It is with the intention of thinking of an alternative that we intend to propose a point of view within phenomenology that can provide new elements to integrate into a psychopathological perspective of the delusional phenomena, namely that of Bernard Waldenfels' responsive phenomenology. Its relevance lies in the provision of theoretical and methodological notions that will allow the construction of a meaning of the delusional phenomena from its more experiential dimension and from its sense of revolves constitution, contributing to models that work to diminish the epistemic injustice. In the following, we will first outline the notion of primary delusion and the limits of understanding in Jaspers. Then, we will briefly enunciate other methodological models of meaning makings and the problems that, in our opinion, still imply epistemic injustice in this. At this point, we will propose some key elements of Waldenfels' phenomenology of the alien, to close with a series of considerations that seem to us offer new paths to address some of the problems of the meaning-making process in delusion and that open a fruitful perspective within psychopathological phenomenology. Primary delusion and the limits of understanding in Jaspers. Unlike doxastic proposals, which tend to consider delusion as a belief, the field of phenomenological psychopathology considered that it comes from a, open quote, mutation of the ontological framework of experience itself, end quote, and a transformation of the way of inhabiting the world as a disturbance of the inactive and intersubjective constitution of a shared reality. This idea is already rooted in Jaspers, who understood delusion as a pre-reflexive event that presents itself as a transformation in the total awareness of reality. Thus, rather than a belief or cognition, delusion will imply an alteration in temporality, spatiality, corporeality, and intersubjectivity that correspond to the a priori framework of consciousness. Therefore, what will be most striking for the clinician from this perspective is not so much the apparently erroneous or implausible nature of a belief, but the incompatibility and disruption between the patient's configuration of the world in contrast with that of the historical and sociocultural frames of reference. Although it was Karl Jaspers himself who, in a pioneering way in the history of psychopathology, enabled this invaluable opening of the understanding of the vital, symbolic, and historical meaning of the diverse forms of suffering, disorder, and illnesses, he was at the same time the one who limited in his own methodological framework that the primary delusion was in fact ununderstandable. As it is known, and we will not review it in detail, the distinction between explanation and understanding leaves the delusion out of the possibility of constructing meaning and hands it over exclusively to the causal investigation. The argument that would allow Jasper to sustain this assertion will be based on the discontinuity of the delusional patient's experience of the world in relation to that which the clinician inhabits. So, where there is a world radically heterogeneous to our own, it is justifiable to point out that there is no possibility of meaning, but merely the mechanical effect of our organic alteration? The rigid Jaspersian limit, particularly when extended not only to primary delusion, but to the whole psychic life, has had, in our view, important unintended consequences. Namely, that sometimes the person with schizophrenia is objectified as a dysfunctional brain and his voice removed to the extent that what he says does not make sense. The rigid and fixed limits of understanding were already questioned by authors of classical phenomenological psychopathology, like Binswanger or Blankenburg. However, the Jaspersian conception has persisted, rooted in the clinic, probably in relation to the practical usefulness in the diagnostic process. Over the last decades, several works have questioned the validity of the Jaspersian argument and even more, its relevance and the injustice of it. Okay. So, meaning and delusion in the contemporary phenomenological psychopathology. As we said, in recent years, within phenomenological psychopathology, the debate on the ununderstandability of the delusion has been taken up again, taking into account not only methodological and theoretical consequences, but also the ethical and clinical ones of conceptualizing the primary delusion as a phenomenon that will be exclusive object of explanation. It is in this context that notions such as understanding and empathy has been critically revised. In the case of understanding, Stangelini and Aragona argue that understanding as a methodology unfolds in the clinical encounter through the hermeneutic exercise of the clinician. Such understanding will not only therefore be intrinsic to the phenomenon, but will depend both on the patient and the clinician, on the setting in which the encounter takes place, and will unfold through the therapeutic relationship. Taking into consideration the central role of empathy in the methodological gesture of understanding, revisions and deepening of this path have been proposed. Along these lines, and under the phenomenological assumption that delusion is a manifestation of a deeper modification of experience and therefore of the world inhabited by the patient, Stangelini on the one hand and Radcliffe on the other have elaborated proposals that deepen empathy. Stangelini has proposed the second-order empathy that will allow grasp, open quote, those experiences that are not understandable via simply transposing oneself into another person, and will therefore provide the possibility of understanding psychotic experiences such as those experienced by people with schizophrenia. To achieve second-order empathy, says Stangelini, will require bracketing my own pre-reflexive natural attitude and approaching the other worlds as I will do while exploring an unknown country. In a similar approach, Radcliffe elaborates radical empathy, which will be a way of engaging other experiences that involves suspending the usual assumption that both parties share the same moral space. Both proposals are fruitful, on the one hand, by pointing out the active effort that the clinician must make at the moment of the encounter, and on the other hand, by making explicit that the basis of this effort is the recognition of the otherness of one's own world with respect to the other. However, as we intend to show, these proposals contain and maintain a series of problems. It is to a certain extent in response to these problems, to the problems of the aforementioned proposals, that other authors, making the use of theoretical normative resources such as epistemic injustice, have proposed that meaning encounters multiple barriers. One of the main one is the lack of hermeneutic resources of clinicians, and that delusions have and give meaning, and that empathy, on the other hand, rather entails risk of epistemic harms, and therefore empathic understanding as a clinical method should be replaced. While these efforts seem valuable, it remains to be understood that they suffer from a number of instructive problems that limit the possibility of forms of meaning-making other than understanding. First, these approaches assume that the construction of meaning is successful and adequate when the patient experiences are translated into something relatively transparent, communicable, and understandable to the clinician. Secondly, that the existing difference in the way of experiencing and communicating between patient and clinician implies a defective difference on the part of the patient that the clinician, endowed with the adequate hermeneutic resources, could delimit and bridge by achieving a complete understanding of what the patient experiences. Finally, that in these proposals lies the idea that the incomprehensible or the ununderstandable, or that in which the meaning does not appear clearly, will be something abnormal to be solved once and for all, and not a fundamental constituent of human experience. It is in this context that in the clinical encounter with a patient presenting a delusion, the challenge faced by the clinician is, on the one hand, not to reduce the delusion to a brain dysfunction, but at the same time not to lead it to a meaning that in many cases is more the result of the clinician's own elaboration than that of the patient, and it is there where some authors have managed to glimpse a problem similar to one we underline here. The most interesting and least explored dimension of meaning in delusion in these diverse investigations is the one that attempts to think something much more radical and theoretically complex, namely that in delusional phenomenon another form of meaning-making is constituted. In our opinion, this is one of the has been less explored so far, and those who have seemed to be working on it are authors such as Rudinanu, Spencer, and Pienkos. A clear example of this approach is the work of Rudinanu and Bortolotti, in which another way of constructing meaning, not from a deficit, in primary delusion is explored. The authors point out for the, in quotes, recovery of the voice of schizophrenia, it becomes necessary to think a form of a meaning that could be hidden in certain unconventional ways of being in the world that have traditionally been associated with the notion of emptiness, defect, and madness, end quote. That is to say, that such forms of meaning will still be waiting to be said in the face of the blindness of the defectualist approach. Thus, the authors open the possibility that delusion has a valid form of meaning, a completely different form in which meaning is shown as encompassing and enigmatic, and that does not refer strictly neither to the self nor to the world, but to a different mode of construction, which unfortunately does not seem to be fully enunciated in these proposals. As we announced it, and is situated in this sort of a dead end in front of the answers of construction of a way that is neither limited to understanding nor to explanation, that we propose the notion of the alien elaborated by the philosopher Bernhard Waldenfels as a useful theoretical resource. From this approach, the delusion is neither reduced to a cerebral dysfunction, but neither is restricted to a meaning which could become externally imposed and definitely closed. In the following section, we develop the notion of the alien according to Waldenfels, and then argue that delusion can be thought of an alien phenomenon that invites the joint exploration of both clinician and the patient in a process of co-production of meaning, which can make place to the experience of delusion in the subject's experience. So now I give the floor to Manuel, my colleague.
Yeah, another Manuel. Thanks. Delusion and the alien. Before addressing the concept of the alien, it is necessary to point out that this concept is situated within the context of Waldenfels' responsive phenomenology, where the pathic, the affection, is situated before intentionality. Responsive phenomenology and the alien are closely intertwined, for it is through paras that we are affected by something, and that allow us to make room for it even without or before the how of the intentionality. The alien will be an experience that precedes recognition and understanding. The alien affects and surpasses all possibilities anticipation. Thus, the phenomenon of the alien does not present itself in the modality of intentionality, that is to say, as a noema-noesis correlation, but in another way, as effects, in quotation mark, of the alien that manifest themselves in the very constitution of action and language, not as something subsequent, since it is not the mechanical or univocal unfolding as a consequences of the alien, but rather the alien demands from the manifestation a taking over, a responding in some way. Although this response is challenged by the surprising access of the alien, the way in which it is modulated through expression, behavioral, affective, or cognitive, is singular and creative, and it is not predetermined. This is why Waldenfels does not speak of the noesis-noema correlation, but of the articulation between the alien and the response or responsivity. It is in each response that the traces of the strange are seen, in the expression of the manifestation of human existence. We always deal with the alien. The alien is an inherent part of our experiences. It refers to a particular type of experience that bursts into our daily lives and challenge our usual structures of understanding. It's characterized by the unpredictability of its appearance and its capacity to disturb the synchronous continuity of temporal succession and conscious subjectivity. In temporal terms, it's experience delayed, since it is experienced in some way posthumously to the event, as evidenced by the temporality inherent to psychic traumas. At the same time, it is suffered, which implies that it's lived as a radical alterity that cannot be fully understood or integrated into our existing categories. Due to this singular temporality and its affective dimension, it can be stated that is its experience as a pre-reflective or ante-predicative level, and consequently prior to the delimitation of what is presented as understandable or explainable. This experience of the alien thus reveals the subject's passivity and receptivity to the unknown, as well as the subject's constant need to try to respond to these unexpected intrusions into our reality, to assimilate and give shape to what appears as restlessness or emotional discomfort. Although this experience of the alien is experienced daily by everyone, Waldenfels classified it into two main categories, relative and radical. The first is related to the limits of the known subject and can manifest itself in every situation, such as social interactions with a stranger. For example, The second, inherent to the very nature of the phenomenon, challenge not only individual readings, but the very possibility of it. For Waldenfels, radical alienness is experienced in events such as birth, trauma, or death, where the phenomenon exceeds any frame of reference and resists being fully understood or possessed by the subject consciousness. Within the framework of this work, we propose to consider primary delusion as a phenomenon of radical alien, to the extent that it is constituted as an experience, an encounter, a being affected by a phenomenon that exceeds any framework of understanding, but which, nevertheless, and this is very significant, does not exclude the possibility of constructing meaning. So, if with Waldenfels we recognize an autonomous status to the alien, and with it to delusion as a type of singular experience that give rise to a certain type of phenomenon that present themselves as inextractable, enigmatic, and refractory to the modalities of intentionality. The first conclusion is to accept that the alien has a positive status, which will manifest itself as excessive or infinite, and no longer as defective. But at the same time, some relevant questions open up. How to give place to something that does not seem to have a proper place? How to accept the intrinsic alienness of a phenomenon and at the same time build something with it, accepting beforehand the duel of totality, completeness, or synthesis? Following the author closely, it is not solved by giving answers that assimilate the otherness or of the phenomenon, or that transform the alien into the familiar. It is in the face of this other form of meaning raised by the phenomenon of the alien that Waldenfels finds it necessary to rethink certain aspects of phenomenology, following the term proposed by Emmanuel Levinas. Thus, the author points out, quote, "The alien as alien requires a responsive form of phenomenology that begins with that which challenges us, calls upon us, or puts on our own possibilities into question in an alienating, shocking, or amazing fashion before we enter into our own waiting to know and wanting to understand situation," end quote. The challenge of the alien pathos arises from an affectively internalized alterity that manifested itself as indeterminable excess, generating a sensation of invasion or bodily discomfort. This experience cannot be suppressed or synthesized, but translated. When we use the notion of translation, we do so in a technical or philosophical sense. If we understand that the operation of translation supposes the contact of two heterogeneous forms or codes without the possibility of absolute equivalence in the attempt to give place to the other in its own, like hospitality, what we conclude is that in each attempt, something of the alien can be said, but accepting at the same time that inevitably part of its meaning will always remain outside. Something will be refractory in each attempt. The translation of the alien thus always leaves something incomplete, a kind of depth, and constitutes a response to its affective interpellation. The notion of response inspired by Merleau-Ponty, and which is articulable to translation, our notion of translation in the philosophical sense, implies both a demand of the alien and a form of creativity in the face of the alien, generating unprecedented connections without following a pre-established pattern. This creates a paradox, since the response always implies a coherent deformation that never fully captures the meaning of the alien, but neither is it an arbitrary construction, but is in constant relation to the heterogeneous affectivity that it shaped it. In this sense, the language used to address the alien is indirect, suggesting more than it reveals and hinting at what happens without fully expressing it, precisely as a translation, the way in which the alien manifests itself always implies a non-coincidence. At this point, although evident, it is necessary to specify that the phenomenon of the alien does not correspond to the incomprehensible, since where the incomprehensible denies the possibility of meaning, the alien affects and challenges the search for it, while the incomprehensible underlies a cerebral dysfunction in Jaspers. In the alien appears a founding characteristic of the human being, while the incomprehensible closed the way the alien open to co-construction of meaning. Conclusions. In this work, we have reviewed the problem of ununderstandability of the primary delusion in schizophrenia, starting from Jaspers, and then giving an account of contemporary proposal. At that point, we have noted the unresolved difficulties for which we believe Waldenfels' responsive phenomenology can address. We have argued that the primary delusion can be conceptualized as a phenomenon of radical alien, as is proposed by Bernard Waldenfels. We believe that the notion of the alien in its connection with a responsive phenomenology can broaden the standard understanding of primary phenomena in schizophrenia. First, to the extent that the responsive view of the alien enables us to think of a different structure of meaning as part of the human experience, where delusion will be an hyperbolic form of it, and therefore not a deficit or mere brain dysfunction. Secondly, to think of delusion as a phenomenon of the alien necessarily implies that it is beyond complete conceptualization, and insofar as it is experienced pathically, it resists the distinction between explaining and understanding. In this way, delusion, as a radical alien phenomenon, is initially experienced and as not understandable. But this does not imply that it is ununderstandable. First, because it is experienced before the possibility of conceptualization, and because when conceptualized, it is open to the possibility of co-constructing meaning. Thirdly, this way of understanding primary delusion and schizophrenia allows therapeutically a relationship of meaning always open in an hospitable way to translation into the subject's own life and cultural tools, as well as to a dynamic relationship with the clinician who is permanently working to modulate or construct new translation of this alien experience. On the other hand, it values that ineffable experience which demands from the clinician not only an ethical effort to understand, but also a respect for the otherness of the other, deep and insatiable. And therefore, our goal ceases to be complete and absolutely understanding once for all. Fourthly, the delusion as the alien allows to recognize the clinician experience of alienness in the face of that which is not understandable at first, guiding the path of exploration in the clinical encounter and also orienting the therapeutic approach. And finally, because of the type of apprehension that the alien insists, it is possible to construct a relation with the symptom, with the human, and with the suffering that understands that the uncoupling, the hiatus, and is an intrinsic part of symbolic manifestation, so that the center of the construction of meaning has at its core the complex processes of translation, and in that sense, the meaning assumes its dimension of incompleteness, precariousness, or of enigma as part of the work of translation. And it understands that this surplus is not a failure, but the positivity of the expression of the alien. Thus, both the clinician and the patient are not forced to have the treatment checked against a normative model, but against the possibility of relief, existential orientation, and of expression and creation around the alien experience. We believe that this proposal, as well as other recent ones, such as those of Pienkos, who tries to think about meaning, subjectivity, and schizophrenia, and takes elements from Merleau-Ponty to push the limits of phenomenological psychopathology, and Bender and Fuchs with the possibility of an psychopathological agnotology, open path within the fields of phenomenological psychopathology that allows us to think about meaning and delusion with the humility that implies recognizing the ununderstandability of the singular human being and the need for the ethical effort of clinicians to make room for the alien without canceling it, but also without subsuming into rigid pre-established frameworks of meaning, recognizing the alien as alien, allowing other ways of meaning making. Thanks a lot.
Muchas gracias, como dice ahí en español.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Manuel and Manuel, for a really extremely interesting proposal and work, which really brings about many associations, I think. And I haven't read anything from the phenomenological literature on delusions which uses this framing that you apply to it. So if there are any questions, people can either unmute themselves or write in the chat. Maybe while people are thinking, I can ask some of the questions that are on my mind. So personally, I really like this proposal that you are making, but I will just try and act a bit like an opponent to this
Great.
by asking you the notion of the radical alien in your formulation of the delusion. How would you say that this is different than disturbances of the pre-reflective self, which have been traditionally for several decades now been present in the phenomenological literature? And why I'm asking is this. For example, some patients, when in the clinical encounter, when they are given the phenomenological framework of pre-reflective self disorders, and we come to a mutual understanding on how the constituents of their self, such as they have a temporality that's maybe a bit changed than what is normative, as you say, and also their thought process is they reflect on their thoughts as strange, somehow changed, not necessarily using the pathologizing language in exploring these phenomena, aren't we doing something similar to what you're, trying to approach this radically alien experience together? Is that similar to this notion of radical alienness?
Manuel, I don't know if you want to respond, or maybe I begin and then.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, our proposal is not, and we're not intent to tackle that point of the issue. I mean, we think it may be complementary and not a different way to approach. I mean, we start from the common ground that we also agree that delusion implies a radical mutation of the framework of experience. So there is like the common ground, and what we're trying to think, it's something that, as you detail, is the experience of the encounter. So, I mean, it could be that in the foundation of the phenomenon of the patient is the pre-reflective self-disorder, but what happens when he tries or she tries to understand it, and the clinician, and we think that there lies an issue that needs to be addressed. In the just person psychopathology, there is no possibility of meaning for that, and it's some sort of mechanical understanding. You can psychoeducate the patient and tell them, this happened because you have a pre-reflective cell disorder, and you have a change in your structure of or your ontological structure. And we believe that that's a way of understanding, but what is most challenging is what emerges in the encounter. Not only that frame of reference or another that can be a psychoanalytic frame of reference of another one, of neurocognitive, but what happens when the clinician meets the patient. And we believe that historically what happens is the ununderstandable of the phenomena has been fruitful to identify that this is a primary phenomena. This belongs to a patient with schizophrenia. And so clinically in phenomenological psychopathology that has sustained over the time. And I think it's very useful in clinical practice, but entails serious consequences that sometimes clinic doesn't want to think about it. But you see, and maybe you also see over there, that clinic unintendedly tend to think patients as, I mean, I don't want to say objects, but some sort of objectified approach to the patient, So although the clinical tool of understandability is useful, it has its limits, and it's ethically has consequences ethically. And I think that is that was trying to work Rosa Ridunano, Lucien Spencer. They saw the ethical consequences of this rigid limitation. But then again, and in the formulation of hers, we see the complication that extending their proposals, everything has meaning in the same way, different, and we believe that delusion has qualitative autonomous or difference that can be stated. So sorry, I tend to speak a lot. So I give now the microphone to my colleague Manuel.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you, Stefan. I would say a few words. No, I think, as you suggest, that our alternative is not necessary, as said Manuel, incompatible with the alteration of the pre-reflexive self, in the sense that that one is like a genetic understanding, and I think our proposal, and we are trying to think about, is how to contrast meaning with the strange. In that sense, we are thinking if there is the possibility, as Manuel says, of giving and constructing meaning, and if this can be have or has, I don't know, effects in the therapeutic. Of course, different from the classical psychoanalytic framework. How to think of a symbolic construction with the patient that can have effects of relief and orientation, something different that not reduce that kind of suffer merely into a pharmacological or psychoeducational indications. I think our proposal, it's complementary that you are saying.
Thank you for a great answer, and lots of food for thought. Let me use this opportunity to ask another question. So, and I will use medical language, which is maybe not appropriate to, but as I understand it, also radical alienness in your proposal seems to have like a binarity to it, that thought, when it's a delusion, then it enters this radical alienness as a characteristic, let's say. But when a person does not have a delusion, then does this alienness disappear? Or how would you explain this when, let's say, medically, when people go into remission and they stop believing some of the narratives that they believed prior to treatment, pharmacological treatment usually?
I think it's a good question. I think we are trying to develop a proposal, and we are starting from delusion. But I think it opens up a way of understanding another kind of phenomena that occurs in the encounter, some as, the famous precox Gefühl, or the bizarreness of the contact by Turi Gosset. So I think, and that's the possibility of the phenomenology of Bendel Waldenfels that entails at the center a apathic way of approaching. And so in responsive phenomenology, what affects us, it comes first, and then the response, no, the responsivity a part of it. So I think the answer, it would be, I don't know. We will need to think about it, but I think it opens a fruitful approach to think also that, what's also there when a patient no longer actualizes, like in the present time, the delusion, I don't know, Manuel, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I think we have a depth in this first proposal that I think it remains to think it's possible some sort of classification between the different types of alienness or strangeness. I don't know if it possible or not. I don't know. That's the first part of the question. And secondly, I think in any case, I think that the sensation of the alienness, strangeness in the different type of experience, it psychopathological or normal ones have a similarities in the sense of the question of or the form of contraction of from a translated form that in some cases maybe were more complex than in another more simple. But our interesting is think and link this notion to construct a kind of relation with this odd experience that is the alienness. Then we know then that we are in depth with the classification, but we are trying to think if this proposal has some kind of benefit or not in the clinical. That is our next step, I think.
It's a great answer, and I also think that this is a very not pathologizing way of approaching this. Not relativistic, but also not pathologizing. So, and just a quick question. So you talk about primary delusions in particular. And would you say that this notion of radical alienness is present in, for example, affective delusion, let's say, again, with the medicalizing language, but for example, in psychotic depression, delusions are of a different kind, at least according to Jaspers, where they can be understood with regards to how they are, developed, and they fit into the possibility of experience. So, and would you say that they also have similar characteristics of this radical alienness, or would you say that this is something different is at place here?
Yeah, it's a good question, and also thinking from Waldenfels, and I think that's also like a good theoretical resource that alien it's as we said in the presentation, present in our current in our daily lives. So it is something alien, probably it is, but we think that in primary delusion there is something that is different and more radical in that sort of way, because that is that we point. It points out the different worlds inhabited by the one and the other. I mean, all our worlds are different, but it seems to, and the experience in the first person experience of the clinician and the first person experience of the patient, that their worlds are slightly, at least, more different than the other. So it is there a difference or an alien experience in the secondary delusion? Probably there is, but not such as one experience in primary delusion, I would say.
Thank you. So, if there are any other questions from either at the Institute of Social Sciences or with our online participants, you've given us a lot of food for thought, I think, Manuel and Manuel. Oh, okay. I think we have a question from Rastko. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you for a great talk. It's really interesting, and I was wondering, should I pose a question or not? Because I'm really not acquainted with this literature and the Waldenfels and everything else, but it's an intriguing topic. So I would like to pose a question nonetheless. So I was wondering, what would you say? How, let's say, how does a philosopher, a really original, authentic philosopher, let's say the era doesn't matter, but we could talk about, let's say, Heraclitus, or we can talk about early Wittgenstein or whatever, and ask, how does this kind of person, which nobody understands, but maybe in principle can understand, how does this person how is this person different than a person that actually has some kind of mental health issue, which includes delusions? And I was wondering if your framework makes a difference in this sense. So in these borderline cases where it's not really clear if something is a delusion or not, does your approach, does your framework bring something new? I was wondering about that.
Thank you. It's a really good question. And I don't know, Manuel, if you want to start, or should I?
I'm thinking the answer. I don't know if you have one.
Yes, I can. I mean, the question of Roscoe is a really good one, but I think it's broader in terms of it challenged the notion of the normal and the pathological, or the normativity. And I some years ago, along with Manuel, we read the Canguilhem book, the famous The Normal and the Pathological, and gives a lot of thoughts and tools to think about this. So, I mean, first, I'm a clinician, so I will give a first answer from a clinician point of view. The difference between Hegel, so to speak, and another person who has a delusion, probably one first to tackle this is the normal functioning in our daily lives. You know, Hegel, probably a few people understand it, but he goes on and teach and write books and so on and so forth. So that is a clinician, but is some sort of like a simplistic point of view. But I think in clinical inhabits works. The second question would be a more like thinking about the normal and the pathological and the normativity. Maybe if we have like, I don't know, Heraclitus today, or Diogenes, so to speak, you know, walking on the streets and so on. Well, there is a framework of normative reference that allow us to say that something maybe is wrong with him. But that is to think of a normative level, you know, the framework of normative ground that you live on. And the third question, the third answer is about this framework, and we think that also this is why it is fruitful, because in its first encounter, it does not differentiate necessarily between what is pathological or not. It challenges us, it affects us, it's something that it's alien to us, but and this is a caricature. I'm a psychiatrist. I know that doesn't work this way, but one could imagine that someone go to your consult and have a brilliant idea, and you are like a classic psychiatry, and says this man is delusion, so I will give the antipsychotics and that's it. You know, it's a form of saying, but in this proposal, you of course give treatment to the patient. You know, this is a proposal within phenomenological psychopathology, within psychiatry, within the mental health. But at the same time, this doesn't mean that you exclude that experience from the encounter. You leave room. This is something that Manuel's works a lot. you make room, like the hospitality for it. And maybe it's something that will be fruitful to work on. Maybe it not, but you do not close, but you open. And this way makes room. And as a clinician, you have to, with this resource and with others, you have to decide whether to treat or not, whether to make one therapeutical movement or another. But it comes after that, after that initial step. So I don't know if I give you some sort of an answer.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, there is so many things to think about. So, thank you.
I'm thinking it's in one aspect a thing about frameworks. Obviously, I believe that philosophy can express itself through writing and the communication, and it tries, as Michel Foucault says, that literature, even philosophy, touch madness in its creation, since it touch the unspeakable experience and phenomenon. I would say also that in the framework of clinical, something central maybe must we added at this aspect of reflection. The type of suffering that the person that creates, that writes, have. If suffering makes a subject feel that it cannot be, as Canguilhem says, normative about his own life, it's a matter of clinicians, psychiatric or psychological, and a question for us. It's one that Rilke point out when a friend, Lou Salome, offers to him, goes to a psychoanalytic therapy. He said he rejects the offer because he thinks about if this psychoanalysis kill my demons, they also will kill my angels of my writing. I think that phrase, it's very useful to think the work of a clinic, the fragile work of a clinic with a patient. That I think that point of the madness that touch a lot of suffering is our task. The point that the touch of madness with writing or creative touch the unspeakable. It's a matter of philosophy or literature. I think something like that.
Thank you very much. It seems really that this kind of criterion of practicality or functionality in everyday life is really important, because maybe what differentiates this. Let's see, take these totally opposing cases, but what differentiates a creative genius from a madman is really that one finished the process of creation and the other one maybe didn't try to go through it, actually. So this process has ended in one person, or somehow developed, but in the other one it just is at some chaotic state. But thank you very much.
We have another question. Please, Sarah, go ahead.
Yes, thanks a lot for the really interesting talk. Actually, I have two separate questions. So my first one is, especially when you're like aligning your thoughts with a pre-reflective self, I was wondering whether in your proposal there might be a difference between schizophrenia and delusions, because I guess in your presentation you were always, or I had the impression that you were talking about them quite in a synonym way, like and especially talking about the pre-reflective self that should, at least to my understanding and how I read SAS, for example, should make a difference. And the second question is about your use of the epistemic injustice. I guess when you were referring to the patient and physician encounters and the possibility to create and like a meaning for the alien, I was wondering how the concept of epistemic injustice was blending in. I wasn't sure about that aspect.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Great questions. Regarding the first one, I would say that our main issue at stake is primary delusion. But you are right that probably we'll transit between primary delusion and schizophrenia, and that's something that occurs in the literature always. You get some kind of mixed up in the middle, and to address this, and we also put a quotation marks in by Jaspers that we have this presentation a few weeks ago, similar one in our university, and someone says Jaspers did not say that, and Jaspers defender. So it was great talk also, but well, you know, general psychopathology was written over many years, many editions, and Jaspers like builds up along with Schneider, and but in some way his and the understandability is placed in the delusion, in primary delusion. But then again, when you read the book, at the end of it, he also, and this is very, I mean, it's a sentence, it's a paragraph, but it's a heavy loading paragraph. He says that what is ununderstandable is the whole psychic life of the patient with schizophrenia, not only delusion, you know? So, and not only the paragraph, but if you read closely Jaspers, it always like some sort of implies this, no? So Jaspers want to, and it's great, I love Jaspers, try to delimit phenomena following his own method, but sometimes you don't know if he is speaking only about delusional phenomena or about the patient, the whole patient, you know, the whole person. So I would say that in our framework, in our proposal, we're trying to understand primary delusion, and probably we have to like frame it down to primary delusion, and because it's more like it's more graspable. But at the same time, and here I will leave the second question to Manuel. And in the phenomenological psychopathology, the delusion would be only a manifestation of a gestalt. So, I mean, I'm trying to wonder as I speak. You know, if I'm talking about delusion, primary delusion, I will be speaking, or will be speaking about the whole constellation of a gestalt of manifestation. So, I mean, the concrete answer would be primary delusion, but probably we have to think more about it to, if we want to just keep it only to delusion, or think about it in a more broad way.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't remember the second question, but I want to say only a thing. We use the notion of pre-reflective because it's taken from Husserl by the Waldenfels himself. to speak or try to say that the affect of the form of manifestation of the affect of the alienness comes before of any kind of cognitive or processing or thought. That's for the first question, but I don't remember the second one.
Yeah, if I may rephrase it, it was about your use of epistemic injustice in the patient-physician encounter, and how you would be thinking, or like how it blends in a way with exploring or making like exploring the meaning of the alienness within the therapeutic encounter.
Yeah, that's coordinate that we want to think about. We are trying now to think more properly the relationship of alienness with epistemological injustice and that kind of topics. I think we only in this presentation we only want to sense that proposal of all that author that we took in our presentation don't think necessarily the positive dimension of the alienness, of the strange, that will is not fully understood in the translation. We want to try to put in a positive way that exceeded of sense that always look it from the literature of injustice, that it's like when the things are not completely translated, it's a problem of justice. We want to try to point out that no, it's inevitable that exists a kind of exceed that you must one another time to try to translate, to construct, and it's also in everyday life experience that exists that kind of strangeness or otherness or alienness. Well, it's we try to include that notion of exceed of sense in the heart of the problem of alienness, of epistemic injustice. But we think we open the of that topic, but our next step, I think, with Manuel, one of them is try to construct or think something like a typology or classification of something that orientates the different types of alienness, if it is even possible. I don't know. That's we want to try to work, and also write and think more about what's about the epistemic injustice if you put the notion of translation and alienness in the heart of the discussion.
Thanks.
Yeah, maybe just to add something to Manuel's answer, we think that the mainly Rosa Ridunano proposal, taking the epistemic injustice and putting together with the delusion, it's a very interesting proposal, taking up giving the voice back to the people with schizophrenia. So delusions haven't give meaning and on his proposal, but worth a thing to think that it has some issues to work and that are great to discuss. And one of these is that you will tend to think that the main goal is to completely understand, no? And you as a clinician, probably you also have seen sometimes clinicians tend to, how to say it, to over understand, no? Understand something from their own shoes and not from the shoes of the patient, or not of our shoes, so to speak, you know? So to try to give a framework of understanding that is not the one of the patient. So the challenge of co-constructing meaning, I mean that, we think that entails something that involves epistemic injustice. I mean, there is something there that needs to be grasped, but also that in that gesture of grasping, something will be left out because it is inextricable or inexhaustible.
Thank you for these great answers. So any other questions for participants? If not, then I will say that we will finish now, and I really am very glad that we had the opportunity to hear about this very interesting proposal, which is very pretty developed and very both theoretically structured and also humane, and seems to have applicability for the clinical setting. So yeah, congratulations on this work, and thank you for giving us this lecture. So thank you.
It was a great discussion also, and we are very happy to be the first Latin American in your series. And it's an honor. So we look forward to have more encounters, and when we will keep working on this. So we will try to publish it soon.
Yeah, we are very pleased for this opportunity. As said Manuel, to come to the opportunity to share our first results in this kind of research, and also for your participation, your question, your commentaries will be very fruitful for our next steps. Then thanks a lot from Chile.
Thank you. Goodbye to everyone.